and welcome back to the Meeple Podcast. I am Bill Price.
And I'm Hollis Biggs.
And we are the podcast for board game beginners. So, lots happened since the last episode. And we are excited to introduce a brand new mechanism into the fold as far as kind of how some games work. And today we're going to be talking about drafting games.
I am excited to go over a couple that we've actually played in the last few days. And we've done, let me get this straight here. We've done open drafting games and we've played closed drafting games.
That is correct. And we're going to get into both of those. So just as a general overview for those of you who are unfamiliar with the term drafting, drafting is any time you are making a selection of, let's call it, cards, tiles, dice, meeples, any sort of anything that you are choosing from an available pool. So, for example, if there is a row of cards out there with 5 different choices, and I get to pick one of them, and then you get to pick one of them, and then I get to, that's drafting. So we have a selection. We played 3 drafting games yesterday, actually.
Yep.
Kind of all in a row, just to sort of get a feel for these. They're all pretty beginner friendly. All seemed pretty enjoyable. They're 3 of my favorite games. And we're also lumping in another game into this drafting mechanism that we have talked about previously, but that's for a little bit later. So first thing we're going to get into is what's called closed drafting. And in a closed drafting system, you are choosing your cards or tiles or what have you kind of secretly, where the other person cannot see what you have to choose from or what you're actually selecting at that point. So with that in mind, I think the first one we'll get into is probably, I would say, one of the most well-known open drafting games really in our hobby. Very beginner friendly. A lot of people who are not gamers have played this and enjoyed this, and I'm talking about Sushi Go.
This was such a fun one to play because we played with 2 people, so just Bill and I, and we each have a hand of, what do we start with? Something like 10 cards?
10
maybe?
cards, yes.
10 cards for 2 players. So we each have our hand and we each get to pick 1 card at a time. So there is, what I learned in playing this game is that, especially because you play a couple of rounds of it, is that there is a strategy to it. I just didn't know that strategy going in. So I would say I was a little bit of a disadvantage, but not exceptionally so. We came pretty close and in points, and while I ultimately did not win, Sushi Go was still a lot of fun.
Yes, and it was very close. It was very close. And this is one of those games that, because it's a pure drafting game, it does benefit from repeated plays, just so that you kind of know what's in there, what scores really high, kind of how to figure out what's coming your way. At 2 players, it's very, very what we call tactical, which means that your decisions are based on what your opponent does. So when I hand her, after I pick my card and I hand her my hand of cards, and she picks her card from hers and hands me hers, she knows what I'm choosing from, and I know what she's choosing from, but I don't necessarily know where she's going. Is she going for this particular strategy, so I shouldn't hand her a whole bunch of this particular card? Should I just take it, or does that not benefit me? Or maybe it does because it blocks her. So it's very, very tactical. Once you if you play with more players, and we didn't play with more players, but I've played this game with up to 5 pretty often. It does play up to 5. It becomes a lot more strategic in that it's not so dependent on what other people are doing per se, because there's so many more cards out there. It's going to be 5 hands before you see your original hand of cards back again. So it's going to be over half of the choices are already gone. So it's going to be more strategic in that you're kind of relying on, all right, I know these particular cards are probably out there in some kind of quantity, I'm assuming, and just math will tell you most of the time that you're fairly accurate to that. And so it becomes a lot more of what am I going to do as far as like what is my plan for scoring points, as opposed to, okay, what is this one particular person doing? So that is kind of a neat thing about Sushi Go with more plays and more players, is it does very much become a different game.
I really liked that in the first round, I didn't necessarily know, I'd read the rules. It wasn't like I didn't know what I was doing, but I didn't have much of a strategy going into it. And I liked that because you are going through multiple rounds to earn your total points, it was kind of nice that I could pivot my strategy or create a strategy, I guess is really the better way to phrase that, for round 2 and then again for round 3. And they were slightly different each time. There was one card in particular that like I didn't see the entire game. I think in the after it had been shuffled, in the amount of cards that we had, I never saw this one card in particular called a wasabi, which is kind of like a multiplier for another card in the game. So like there were certain things that I was a little frustrated by. I thought I would see more of them, and it just didn't happen.
Well, you didn't see them because I kept taking them.
Yes, thank you, Bill.
In my hand, yes. So, they are. That's a big favorite of mine as far as collecting those, because they are a multiplier. So basically, in essence, it's one of the simplest games that you can possibly think of. You have a hand of cards. You pick one. You pass the rest. Pick one, pass the rest. Pick one, pass the rest. By the time it comes, eventually you'll just have one card. It goes in front of you, and then you score the cards based on certain set scoring rules. And that is the whole game in a nutshell.
Yeah. There's no dice. It's just cards. Mm-hmm. This one, I know one thing that I like to highlight is games that are pretty mobile and pretty easy to transport if you want to take them to a friend's house, a party, a family gathering, whatever you want to do. This would be a great example of one of those like easy to transport, very mobile games.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's just a deck of cards, and that's the whole game. So, and so that is a good example of a closed drafting game. It is by one of my favorite designers, Phil Walker Harding, who does a lot of more beginner-friendly games, more gateway-type games. So we will definitely be discussing him further on future episodes. But
I'm excited to check out a couple more.
That is a great first one for him. So,
awesome.
What's next?
So the next one we're going to talk about is Draftosaurus. It is another closed drafting game. And this one just is composed of every player has a like game board, which looks like almost like a little zoo, like a little kind of with enclosures and things like that. But it's a little board for you to play and for you to place your meeples on that you draw. And I am going to tell on myself here because we've been doing this podcast for a couple of weeks now, and embarrassingly enough, I did not know what a meeple was. I would like to consider myself more of the personality hire for this podcast, whereas Bill has all of the board game knowledge. I just enjoy playing board games. I knew very little about any of this stuff, so you guys are learning right along with me. But we were a couple weeks in, and I was too afraid to ask what the Meeple podcast meant. So again, I'm telling on myself here a little bit, but it is good to know. And meeples are little wooden, typically wooden, sometimes plastic, like tokens or figures almost.
Yeah, little tokens, markers.
Yeah, a lot of times they look like people. Sometimes, like in Draftosaurus, they actually look like little dinosaurs, which are the cutest. And this is why this was one of my favorite games. So, anyway, that is... Don't be embarrassed if you also did not know what a meeple was. I did not know either. So, you guys are learning right along with me.
Yes, and if anyone needs an example of a prototypical meeple, if you go to our website, www.themeeplepodcast.com, you will see several images of meeples shaped like people. And honestly, had I known, and see, this is the kind of stuff that helps me, because it never occurred to me that wasn't common parlance, but I guess it's really not. And so I make assumptions all the time and am often wrong. But this, so I blame myself. This was my fault.
Listen, this whole experience has been a learning process, and I appreciate Bill being patient with me and with all of you out there who also don't know things like this, like what a meeple is. So, anyway, to get back to Draftosaurus, because it is a really great game, and I think of the three, this was... I want to not pick favorites, but I would say this was probably my favorite. This was really easy to play with 2 players, but this one plays up to 5.
Up to 5 as well, yeah.
And on your game board, because you have these little, almost like enclosures is what they look like. They're little sections of the board that have like little pens where you're going to put your, in this case, dinosaur meeples. So you are I would say this is the closed drafting element of this game, is that you are drawing from a large bag of meeples, and you're randomly selecting. I think we did. I think the rules say 6 your first round or something.
You're pulling out six meeples, and you are secretly in your hand holding them, and you're selecting one, and then you're passing them just like Sushi Go. You're passing to the next person, and then you place your dinosaur meeple in one of the pins.
Yep.
And so that's the closed drafting element, is nobody knows, okay, I know what's in my hand, I know what I'm choosing from, but I don't know what's coming my way. So I don't know, are there more of this color to place in this pen that scores me more points for the same type of dinosaur? Or should I be going for different types? But I don't know what's coming to me still. So, and it's played over 2 rounds, and you'll eventually get 12 dinosaurs on your board. And every dinosaur, or every pen that you have, because you're building a dinosaur park, a dinosaur zoo, and apparently a very safe one, because there's like no need for security, and like there's families walking around on this board and everything. It's like T-Rexes and kids. What could go wrong? But every pen scores differently. So one pen will say want a bunch of the same dinosaurs. One wants nothing but different dinosaurs. One wants pairs of dinosaurs. One wants 3 dinosaurs and 3 dinosaurs only. One pen, you score points if that particular type of dinosaur is the only type of it in your entire park, and so on. So there is a lot of strategy in where you place what meeple, but you're not always sure what's going to come back to you. You may say, okay, well, I feel pretty safe because I've got, a couple of this type here, and you pass it off, and the other person or people end up taking those, and you never see another one. So you're like, man, I made the wrong call there. But it is, I think it's silly fun. It's kind of random. One thing that really throws a wrench into it, and I think really makes it fun, which we did not talk about, is there is a big wooden die that one player rolls each turn, and that die kind of tells all the players at the table, except for the one rolling the die, where they cannot place certain dinosaurs. So, like, they may roll a die, and everybody has to place their dinosaur only on the left side of the board, or only on the right side of the board, or only in an empty pen, or only you can't place it in a pen that has a T-Rex, or things like that. And that can really wreck plans. And it really wrecked a lot of my plans in the last game. I won, but barely. So, and only because I played this a whole bunch of times.
There's also, some fun elements that, like, every T-Rex that you put on the board is worth an additional point at the end of it. So I actually have really collected no T-Rexes because I those just weren't the meeples I was drawing. I felt like I was filling up all my other enclosures and I was making this really great Jurassic Park dinosaur zoo, but unfortunately in the end it was all for naught. But it was still a lot of fun. And I think this is a fun game. think this one says for players like 8+, but I really think this is like a fun one that kids and adults would both like and enjoy and be able to play together nicely. There should be no board flips. This is a fun game. So
it is, and it's very quick. It's 10 or 15 minutes, even with 5 players. This is very much a game that, like you said, kids and adults can play. But also, I play this game with like hardcore, big, crunchy Euro game players that are just like, my game's better than your game, and they'll sit down and play Draftosaurus because it's quick, it's easy, it's fun, it's a filler game. People who Uno players can play it,
Yep.
but so can really complex players. So it is a really good one that I think appeals to a lot of different people, and big recommendation from me has always been Draftosaurus.
it is now one of my favorites. All right, so I think we're going to switch from closed drafting to open drafting.
Yes.
Right?
We
All right.
are.
Awesome. So the next one I want to talk about is Kingdomino. So Kingdomino is a really great example of open drafting. And Bill, I might turn this one over to you to talk about it a little bit more in depth because it's a special game.
Absolutely, it is. So Kingdomino was actually a Spiel des Jahres winner in 2017, and that is the German game of the year. It's typically awarded to a family weight game. Anything above Gateway really usually isn't eligible for that. That's more the Kenner Spiel des Jahres, which is more complex games. But so this was this highly acclaimed, very well loved. It is a top 100 game to almost everybody in the community. Really big hit. But what it is basically you're building a grid of tiles. So you have these tiles that are basically double tiles. So they each have a square. Each tile has 2 squares of terrain on it. Like say, think farmland or
I think I described it as Farmville-esque.
Yes.
Which is probably offensive to the Kingdomino creators, so I'm really sorry in advance, but
there's river tiles, there's forest tiles, there's mining tiles. And so what you do is you have these 4 tiles laid out, and you have meeples, your color meeples. You get 2, your opponents each get 2. And you have, I'm really describing the 2-player game here with 4 tiles, but with more players, you'd have more tiles. You'd have twice as many tiles as there are players, because each player will have 2 meeples. And so what you do is you initially set it up with everybody's meeples are on 1 tile. And then you set up another round of tiles. And starting from the top, which are the worst tiles. So it's in numerical order. The worst tiles are at the top, the best tiles at their bottom. I'll kind of explain what makes a tile good or bad, but in essence, the first people to choose are going to get the worst tiles, but they get to decide. They get first pick of what tile they get on the second round.
Which makes a big difference because, again, your strategy can slightly change each round.
Exactly, depending on what tiles come out. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to build a 5x5 grid in front of you around your castle, and you're going to score for groupings, uninterrupted groupings of particular terrain types, like a whole bunch of water tiles or a whole bunch of forest tiles put together. But then you're multiplying that number of tiles by the number of crowns that are on those tiles. And the really good tiles, which are the ones later on, they can have 1, 2, or up to 3 crowns on them. The not very good tiles, the ones at the top that you get to pick first, they are not very good. They don't usually have crowns, and some of them can be double tiles of the same terrain type, which isn't always beneficial. And so the challenge is okay, I really want these good tiles, but if I take a good tile, then I'm going to be last to pick from the next set of tiles. What if the next set has even better tiles that I want? So you kind of have to, there's that fun game within a game of not only are you playing just a simple, I'm drafting this tile and I'm playing this tile and I'm drafting another tile, but you're also like having to consider a lot of these choices as far as how you're setting yourself up for the next turn. So I know this is a lot of words and it makes it sound like a much more complicated game than it is, but this is, you could probably play this with a 7-year-old. It says 8+, which I think is reasonably accurate. It is just, at its core, you're just drafting tiles and laying them down in front of you in a grid. That's as basic as it gets. Hopefully you score some points.
Yeah, I think the toughest part for me was that you're, with two people, you're kind of having to visualize, because you've got one central castle that is like a little, it's the size of one tile, or half of one of the tiles, sorry. So the toughest thing for me was that I'm having to visualize an invisible, like 5x5 grid, and I kept shooting myself in the foot because I kept, kind of cutting myself off from certain types of land or water in this case. So I kept having to like visualize where I could put other tiles and like what tiles I would really need to come out next in the next round in order to score the most points, which ultimately I did not score the most points. So that was
but close.
But it was a lot of fun, and I feel like you're kind of making up your strategy as you go. This isn't one that you needed to like read up on a Reddit thread or something about what strategy you should have ahead of time, because a lot of this is at its core kind of random with the tiles.
Oh, for sure.
It's kind of the luck of the draw of what in a 2-player game, what 4 are, placed in front of the 2 of you. So sometimes you get lucky and sometimes you don't. Big strategy though, or what I thought was going to be a big strategy for me, was collecting mining tiles. Thank you. And unfortunately, I realized afterwards there's only 6 of them in the entire game. Only 6 tiles the entire time. And that was kind of tough because there are, just to, give an example of a different one, there are 26 of the like grassy farmland. So it was kind of tough because I didn't realize that ahead of time, and that's my fault for not looking at the rules. So that's on me. But it's definitely helpful to kind of get that idea ahead of time. That would be my only, not necessarily critique, but my only words of wisdom to someone that's new to Kingdomino.
Yes, look at the distributions of the tiles ahead of time. That does definitely help. But this is a very simple game. It is it's a game you can just sit down, bust out in 15 minutes or less, and just laugh and have a good time and not have to stress out about anything. Most of the scores, ultimately, unless you're playing with Rain Man, who would probably dominate this game.
Absolutely.
Unless you're playing with somebody that's minded that way, or like somebody who's just super into spatial puzzles and like really like, like a beautiful mind going in the background, right? Numbers and square roots and stuff. Unless you're playing with somebody like that, you're probably not going to, win or lose by a ton. So and it's so fast, it doesn't matter. You can just set it back up and play again. All of these games are so quick and so easy that the fun really is in playing them. It's not one of these 2-hour games where you finish and you're like, man, I lost and I wasted 2 hours of my life. And now I'm angry about it. You're never angry about losing any of these games.
No, these were all a lot of fun. Bill, can you maybe give us some other examples of some drafting games that somebody else might enjoy?
Yes, and actually, I wanted to talk real quick about the 4th drafting game that you had already played, that we have already talked about, which has open drafting in it, and that is Ticket to Ride.
Oh, yeah.
So Ticket to Ride does have that open drafting system of having the cards that you get to choose from, and everyone at the table sees what you're choosing from and what you're choosing. So that can help people potentially do what's called hate drafting, which is taking something just because they know they don't want you to get it.
Oof. I'm not going to say I've never done that before, but
Yes.
That's a strategy in its own right.
Indeed. So we are about out of time here. So as far as additional recommendations, I'm going to put some up on the website after this episode is released. So you can check that out at, again, www.themeeplepodcast.com. You can check us out on Instagram at The Meeple Podcast. And you can also email us at themeeplepodcast@gmail.com. And we will answer any questions and anything. We'll read stuff on the is this on the air? I don't even know what.
Yeah, I would say.
Okay,
roughly.
yeah, on the podcast. So yeah, we'd love to hear from you. And you got anything else?
No. Thank you guys for tuning in. We really appreciate it, and we're excited to talk about some new games next week.
Yep, we'll talk to you next week. Bye.